for a few weeks. So we're going to kind of retell the story, and then we're going to take a big part of it and just sort of reflect on it. And this has been like one of the there's just so much interesting things in here. I hope. Sometimes I think interesting. Other people don't always think are interesting. But I think they're interesting, so maybe I'm preaching to myself today. But the story of Esther is not, it's in the Bible, but it's not a Christian story. So the name of God is not mentioned. There's no prayers in there. There's no feasts. It's Jewish literature, 100% Jewish literature. And even from the context of a Jewish perspective, it's written at the time of what we call the diaspora. So it's when the nation of Israel was carried away into captivity, and this is about 500 years before Jesus' return. So there's about 1 million plus 1.2 million Jews that now live in the Medo-Persian Empire under the rule of King Xerxes. And they've been gone for about 70 years. Some of them went back. They were all supposed to be back, but only about 40,000 of them did. So there's a large group of Jewish people living throughout the Medo-Persian Empire who are not really practicing their Jewish faith in any really significant way. It's kind of been blended and blurred together with the faith of the Persians. And so they're not really, in fact, in many respects, they're forgetting their Jewish culture. They're forgetting their the Hebrew language. That was a problem that was written about in different places of the Bible, particularly when people were coming back. So this is a really interesting period. This is really the formation of modern Judaism, because the worship as it existed didn't worship around a temple. There wasn't a temple when they were carried away. It was destroyed. It was rebuilt, but all the million Jews who lived in the Persian Empire, they would never go see the temple. So there was synagogues. So this is where synagogue worship began. And so one of the things that we remember when we look at this time period is that the gospel was proliferated by Jewish synagogues, Roman roads, and the Greek language. That's what made the spread of the gospel possible. So these Jews, even though they're not really practicing their Jewish faith, are very central to the importance of the gospel as we know it today. So the story it's kind of at times a body story. It's not body as in it's body. It's sensual. It's kind of a crazy story. But there's this king, Artaxerxes, who has this terrible military campaign in Greece. He comes back and he's kind of a little bit of a philanderer. He likes to, in fact, it's what got him in trouble. So he drinks a lot. When we hear all the stories, it's always they're drinking. So he's throwing a big party to show all of the wealth of his empire, which is usually something people do after they lose badly at a war. They want to let everybody know, no, things are good. So he's throwing this great big party, goes for 180 days, and now he's focused on the capital city of Susa. He throws this great big party for all the men. His wife Vashti throws this big party for all the women. They're all drinking. Everybody's having a good time. The king decides it'd be nice for his wife to come out and dance for the men, wearing only her crown. She, of course, says, I'm not going to do that, and he gets pretty honked off. Now, she's pretty important to the story, too, and we overlook Vashti a lot because without Vashti, as we'll see, there's no Esther, and without Esther, there's no Jewish people, and without the Jewish people, there's no Jesus. So all of these little things are these really important sort of hinge points in the history of the Christian people, even though none of these people are Christian and are not even practicing Jews, and there's no indication at all that faith even plays a part of it. So anyway, King Xerxes is angry. He deposes his wife. She gets booted out. After he kind of calms down, he says, well, I need to have a king. So he has a queen, rather. So he has a queen contest. Through all of the regions of the Medo-Persian Empire, hundreds of virgins would come, and they would have an opportunity to be with the king. It took a year of training. So they're going to come in, and they're going to sleep with the king one time, and if they please the king, then they get to be the queen. If not, they just go into the harem, where they would be treated royally. They would be treated well, but they would essentially be prisoners living in the opulence of the capital city in Susa, but they would still be prisoners. So it's a strange contest that Esther wins. Been a lot written on, how she people have criticized her, but she's just a young woman who doesn't have any choice. She's taken, but she wins the queen contest. So she becomes queen. And there's a big party, a big celebration. Now, right after that, there's this little story that's important to the one that we're going to tell. There's an assassination attempt on the life of King Xerxes. And Mordecai, who is Esther's, I want you to remember all of these names because there's going to be a Survey Monkey list that's going to go out, and we're going to see how. And you'll be judged. That's what we'll do. We're very good at judging here. So so Mordecai is her cousin. Her dad, his uncle, had been killed, and so he's an older cousin. He's adopted her. So he's watching over her. He goes to the courthouse every day, to watch to see if she's doing well. So there's obviously some affection there, although it's kind of strangely placed, as we'll see. So he's kind of checking up on her. He finds out about this attempt to assassinate Xerxes, which is actually how he ended up dying, because he slept with one too many of his lord's wives, and one of them killed him. But there's this assassination attempt. Mordecai finds out about it, and he tells Esther, and she tells the king. Now, she doesn't really necessarily say a whole lot about it, but she saves the king's life, and then it gets put into the king's chronicles. So it's the journal. So there's this event that happens that saves the king's life, and it's written down. But then the story switches immediately to the antagonist, a man named Haman. And in fact, this whole story is not really about redemptive, like the story of the gospel, things like that. This is about how the Jewish festival of the Purim comes around. So when they read this story every year, and they've been doing this for about 2,500 years. In fact, there were Nazis in the Nazi Holocaust. There were Jewish people that had the entire book of Esther memorized so they could then repeat this story over and over and over again. So it's very, very much about the Jewish culture. This is a Jewish story, Jewish history. And so then whenever they read this story and the word Haman comes up, they have these little noisemakers, and I can't remember what they call them, but it's kind of this rasping sound, and they make this sound whenever the villain, comes up in the story, sort of like, like, what do you call those little plays that you go to where they all, when the villain comes out, everybody goes, boo, I don't know. Anyway, they're silly. Anyway, that's kind of what it is. Not that silly. I don't want to call somebody's tradition silly. It's just, never mind. They make this sound when the villain comes in. So the story goes right to Haman, who has the favor of the king. The king likes favor. He's elevated him to a high position, so much so that there's been this decree that when his name is mentioned or anything goes on, everybody has to bow down. Now, it wasn't a religious practice. It just was Persian culture. And lots of Jewish people would do it. It's not about worship. It's not about a false god. There's other stories like that like from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where they wouldn't bow down because it was worship. This isn't this. This is just Mordecai being obstinate because he got passed up for a promotion. He did something great for the king. It wasn't mentioned. So he won't bow down to the guy until finally Haman finds out about it, and he's pretty honked off about his guys. I'll say, hey, there's this Jewish guy, and he won't bow down to you because he's Jewish. So he's pretty frustrated about it, and he decides that he's going to punish not just Mordecai, but all of the Jewish people. So he's going to completely eradicate. His plan is to eradicate all of the Jewish people. And they roll some dice with the Purim, which is where the name comes from, the Hebrew word for dice. And that's where the festival comes from. So he rolls the dice. They select the date. On this date, all the Jews in the kingdom are going to be killed. He goes to Xerxes, and he explains it all to them. He says, listen, I'll give you 10,000 talents of silver, which would be millions and millions and millions of dollars from all the plunder they would take from the Jewish people, because the Jewish people, even though they were kind of spread out, they were prospering. So they liked the Medo-Persian Empire. They liked it. They didn't want to go back to the humble land that they had in Palestine. They were developing wealth. They were marrying into families. They were doing fine. So they would make a lot of money. Now, it'd be good for a king that just lost a terrible war to Greece to have a bunch of money, but he says, no, don't worry about the money. He says, here's my signet ring, sign it, get it out there, do it. It goes out to all the couriers. All the message goes out all throughout the Medo-Persian Empire. And it says that Haman and Xerxes sat down and had a drink, and the rest of the land, particularly Susa, the capital city, was just absolutely bewildered. They didn't know. Because remember, these would be people that they knew. So there were Jews. These would be people who had married Jews. These had been people who had business associates. They had children. This would be a Jewish people that had become very integrated into the lives of this other people group. And Haman's whole point is they're obstinate. They have not adapted to our culture. They have their own beliefs, their own traditions, and it's going against our own traditions. So we need to have them killed. So that's how then the story then moves to Mordecai, who is the Jew. In fact, at times they call him Mordecai the Jew. And he's wailing and he's upset and he's wearing sackcloth and ashes, which again is not necessarily just a Jewish thing. People in that culture, if they were really feeling a lot of pain, a lot of mourning, a lot of, just basically suffering, they would go through this series of sorrow, and they would wear sackcloth and ashes, and they would roll around in the ashes, and it basically is just wearing a camel hair suit, a shirt. It's a really uncomfortable shirt. So he's wearing that. Esther finds out about it. Now, you can't be in the king's court with sackcloth and ashes. So she doesn't know anything about this. She sends through a messenger. She says, hey, you can't be doing this. Here's some clothes you can wear. He refuses to put the clothes on. He sends back a message to her saying that here's the edict. Here's what's going to happen. Here's the date it's going to happen. Here's how much money it's going to happen. She tells him the whole story. So she sends back, and he says, you need to tell the king. And it's here where he says, maybe it's such a time as this that you've been placed here. But remember, he never says God has placed you for such a time as this. He doesn't pray that God anoints this time. It's just, maybe this just is a time in history. You might saying, hey, maybe the universe has lined it up for you to be here. That some people would look at it that way. She says, but hey, if I do this, if you're not invited into the presence of the king, you would be killed if you just showed up. So she doesn't even, and this is 5 years later, and she said, I haven't even been invited into the king's bedroom for a month. So he's got his eye on somebody else in the harem, and she said, I haven't even been with the king for a month, which gives you a little bit of an idea of this, what the culture is and what she's up against. And then you might remember that she says, okay, well, if I live, I live. If I die, I die. But again, not a religious. She says, she doesn't say if God spares me, if God, will deliver me, I trust in God. She just says, so there's sort of this fatalistic approach to all of it. It kind of lacks purpose. It lacks any sort of divine aid. It doesn't have any of that in the story. It's just it's like what our friends would go through that aren't saved. They would go, I don't know if I'm going to live. I don't know if I'm going to die. There's just sort of people responding to very, very difficult circumstances. Believe it or not, every story that we hear that teaches us something about God doesn't have to be a religious one. There's lots of things that we see the hand of God in. All kinds of things. Literature, music, painting, just the stories of people's lives. Not everything has to kind of have the stamp of religious approval, does it? We learn from God everywhere. So then she ends the story with this part of it, telling Mordecai, I said, okay, I'm going to go fast with my maidens for 3 days, and you tell the Jews in Susa to fast for 3 days. And again, fasting would just be part of a way of showing mourning, maybe trying to find insight. It's not necessarily religious. Almost every culture on planet Earth at some point has some tradition of fasting. So this is not a Jewish thing. This is a Persian thing. This is just, hey, we're going to fast. Nothing about praying, nothing about appealing to God. We're just going to fast for 3 days. Now, this is where the story wakes up. And the message of this, as we'll find out, is called 1,000-year day. Because it starts off with her coming into the king's presence. Now, this is the first time. This happens in chapter 5, if you want to go in. I'm going to look at the next 3 chapters kind of all together. She comes into the king's presence, and she's dressed in all of her royal robes. And it's the first time that she's announced as Queen Esther. So she doesn't know if she's going to live, but the king is happy to see her and extends the scepter and says, what do you want? Anything up to half my kingdom, which is not a literal promise. It's something that happened a lot. That would be a saying that would go around a lot. He says, what do you want? Anything you want. So she says, well, what I would like is I would say, thank you. She says, my first petition is that you allow me to live. And then my second one, what I would like would be to schedule a feast with you, with Haman, just the 2 of you. So she has a feast with just the 3 of them. They come, they immediately go get Haman. He's excited. Remember, here's a guy he's an opportunist. He's kind of a sycophant of Xerxes. He's drawn to power and to wealth, all the things that plague the heart of humanity. And they get him. He's excited. He comes, and Xerxes says, okay, now, what's your petition? Up to half my kingdom. She goes, well, I'd like to invite you to another banquet tomorrow. Okay? Sounds kind of strange. Another banquet tomorrow. So they say, great. Haman is excited. He goes back to all his guys, and he goes back to his wife, and he's bragging. His heart is just filled with pride. He's talking about, I have so much wealth. I have lands. I have sons. I've got all of these things. And I was the only one invited to this banquet with the king and the queen. Queen Esther herself invited me to this banquet. He says, but every time I see Mordecai the Jew standing, I'm not going to be able to enjoy this banquet I'm going to because I got to walk right past him. So he's talking about all of the things that he has. Wealth, sons as an inheritance, power, the opportunities with the king. And he can't get past this one guy who won't kneel down when he walks past. So his wife, Zeresh, she says, well, put a pole up 75 feet, a gallows pole, some of your texts will say. But it's for actually impaling him. So build a big pole, get permission from Xerxes, impale the dude on the 75-foot pole, then you can enjoy your meal. He thinks that's a great idea. So he builds the 75-foot impaling pole. Impaling pole was a really horrible way to die, by the way. Just, you would get kind of stuck on the pole, and you'd writhe around until the pole would go all the way through your body and through your mouth, and it took a long time to die. So it was a really horrible, I felt like I was losing some of you there, so I want to make sure I just throw that in. Visuals are very important. That's right, you got to keep it inching. All right, so he's all excited. He goes back to the king. Now it's late at night. The king can't sleep. Xerxes can't sleep, so he has one of his secretaries come out and read the king's chronicles. So he's just basically working late. He's going through, he said, I can't sleep, I might as well get some work done. And he's going through all of these chronicles, and he comes across the part that says Mordecai saved his life and made him aware through the queen of this attempted assassination. And he goes, what did we do for Mordecai? And his officials say, we didn't do anything. And so then he goes, well, we have to change that. He says, who's in the courtyard right now? And it was Haman that had come in to ask permission to impale Mordecai. So Haman comes, he says, bring me Haman. Remember, you couldn't just come in, but Haman is now this growing affection of the king. He's on the inside. He says, bring Haman in to me. And the first thing he says is, what would you do to a man that has done right by you, that you're saying, this is a good man, this is a great man? How would you honor that person? Well, Haman thinks he's talking about him because he just went to a meal with the king and Queen Esther. So he's going, this is about me. So he said, here's what I would do. I would get the best horse that the king is ridden on. I'd put him in a robe that the king has worn. I'd put a plume on the horse's head. I'd parade him through the city saying, this is a great man, and this is what happens when the king is pleased with you. And Xerxes likes that idea. And he says, you go do that for Mordecai. The guy that he was just there asking if he could impale on a 75-foot pole. So his day changed. So he now has to do exactly what he said. He goes out and he takes Mordecai, parades him all through the city, telling him how pleased the king is. And this is what happens to great men who please King Xerxes. It says Mordecai is very happy, everybody's happy, but he went home with his head covered, distraught. And he goes back to the very people that said, his wife Zeresh and all of his guys, and she basically says, you're screwed. She goes, Mordecai's a Jew, and with all of this that's going on, this will not come out well for you. So you're like, thanks, dear. Immediately, some of the servants from the king get Haman, and they take him to the feast. So now is the second feast, 24 hours later. Now there's the next feast. And the king once again says, all right, what's your appeal? And she again says, thank you for letting me live. She touches the scepter would be extended, and she touches it. And she says, there's been this edict that has gone throughout all the land, that all the Jews will be killed and all of their property plundered, everyone, men, women, children, everyone, complete eradication. She said, if this had just been about slavery, been taken in slavery, I wouldn't have bothered you. But this is the complete annihilation of my people. Now that's significant because this is the first time that she's revealed herself to be a Jew. She's saying, these are my people. So the king has got to be having some strange thoughts, because it was just a few weeks ago, not even that long ago, that he had just signed an edict to have them all killed. He was the guy that gave it the authority. So he's got all kinds of complex ideas. He just elevated Mordecai. We're not really told if he knows that Mordecai is a Jew or not, but I suspect he probably does. So there's this little disconnect from the king and what he just said about the Jewish people, because they call Mordecai the Jew, and they say that all the time. He's the guy that was standing. It's very likely that he probably knew Mordecai was a Jew, and so he's probably thinking, and he'd been drinking, maybe he didn't even remember. Maybe he's like, what did I do? Didn't I just sign for the annihilation of all these people? But then I just elevate this guy, and then I find out my wife's a Jew, right? This is a lot. And he goes, who would do this? And he goes, it's this traitor, Haman. So he's furious. He leaves the room. He's got a lot to sort out, doesn't he? All just in this little period of time. He's got a bunch to sort out. Haman, in the meanwhile, throws himself onto Esther. She's lounging, as would be kind of appropriate to that culture, on a couch. He throws himself at her to beg for his life. The king comes back in right when he's doing that, and he basically says, are you making moves on my wife in my house? And immediately the servants cover Haman's head. He says, go impale him on the pole he just put up. That's the story. Everything gets reversed. We'll kind of dig into that. There's a lot of little things in these 3 chapters I want to, but that's the story. And I think I got most of it right.
I'm guessing that's where the term goes around comes around.
Well, here's Here's what I want to reflect on. I want to reflect on what did Esther know and what did Esther do? What did Haman know and what did Haman do? What did Xerxes know and what did Xerxes do? And most importantly, what did God know and what did God do? Now, Esther, and this is where everything changed. This is where she changes from a young virgin who won a queen contest 5 years ago and became a queen in name, but now becomes a queen. Everything changes. The first thing that she knows that if she goes into the presence of Xerxes without being invited, it was a death sentence unless the king spared her life. So she doesn't know if she's going to live or if she's going to die. But what did she do? Well, she prepared a banquet. Not even knowing if she was going to be alive to enjoy it, not even knowing if anybody, if Xerxes or Haman was going to come. But in her mind, now this is just some of my sort of observation and reflection. In her mind, she had to have something that I'm going to the king for. I'm kind of falling out of favor with him. I was able to turn his head 5 years ago. He's not quite as interested in me, Maybe she's thinking, I still got it. I can get him to notice me again. I don't know. We don't know. She doesn't know she's going to live or die. That's what we know that she knows, that she could die. But she still did something. She still made a feast. Does she have a plan? Well, she's got at least that much of one, right? She's got a little one. There's a little formulating plan. But when she, first of all, lives and is able to ask the big ask, why didn't she just go straight for the question and say, well, there's this terrible thing? And probably she's stalling for some reason. There's some reason she's delaying the big ask that she was going to put to Xerxes. What does she know? Maybe she knows Haman is going to load his own gun and shoot himself. If you give him enough rope, he's going to hang himself, as so many of the different analogies go. He's going to be, he will self-destruct. He's not a very smart guy. He's ambitious. He's a sycophant. He's power hungry. He's prideful. He's gonna blow himself up, which does happen. But she's banking on like soon. It's only 24 hours. That's a lot. That's a lot to unravel in 24 hours, right? So maybe she's thinking something like that. If I just give Haman enough time, he'll screw it all up, which kind of fits the narrative. It's interesting. You learn a lot about these stories by reading through what's called the Midrash, which is hundreds of years of Jewish theology. That kind of, with the way they do their theology, is theologians will just sort of add to the volume of wisdom. So some of these Jewish theologians have speculated maybe she's counting on the jealousy of her husband, because her husband was, kind of a player, and, players know players. And so maybe she's going to use some of her womanly wiles to sort of get Haman to feel like, he's interested, which would make her jealous king angry. And maybe that's part of it. It does kind of fit the narrative too, because at the end there was sort of this, that kind of happened, right? And maybe she knows that about Xerxes. Xerxes is, he's a jealous guy, and he's not going to be happy about this. Here's what I think. I think she doesn't really know what she's doing. I think she knew she was going to have a plan to have a meal, and then I think she's kind of like probably just feeling very relieved that she's not dead and that she has the favor of her husband. And she's like, I'm going to put the rest of this off until tomorrow. I think she's just kind of stalling. I'm pretty sure, I think she doesn't know what she's going to do. But what did Haman know? All Haman knew was that his enemy, the Jewish Mordecai, from the first meeting to the end, he's just thinking, I'm going to be able to get this guy off because I've got this great favor with the king. I've been raised to great prominence. The queen likes me. I'm good. How much did that change in 24 hours? And events that he would have no clue of. What did Xerxes know? Xerxes didn't really know much. He knew his queen had a petition, and he knew that all of a sudden he kind of was interested in her again. She kind of turned his eye. He's like, all right, yeah, what do you want? But he didn't know. We're not told that he knew Mordecai was a Jew. He did not know that his wife was a Jew. For whatever reason, there's this disconnect about those pretty big details and the fact that he'd called for the annihilation of all of the Jews just a few weeks previous. So he doesn't know some pretty important parts, right? There is a huge question about what's going to happen between this banquet and this banquet, right? Now, I started thinking about that in my own life, in my history, kind of like what's going on in my life right now. And there are things that I sort of know. There's a lot more things I don't know. But I am extraordinarily encouraged by Esther, who says, I have to at least take this one little step. And maybe that's all it's going to be. Maybe I walk in, I've got all this food prepared, my people made a great meal, somebody else is going to enjoy it because I'll be dead. There's no way she could have possibly scripted what happened between that first meal and 24 hours, the second one. I've even thought of this. Maybe she knows Zeresh. Maybe she knows Haman's wife. And she goes, that is the dumbest woman that I know. She's horrible. She's going to give him terrible advice. And that's going to backfire on him. I don't know. We don't know that. That is so many things to happen in such a short period of time, right? There was another Jewish writer, Peter, who also wrote to Jews of the later diaspora when they were all driven out of Jerusalem. So this is about 500 years later. And this is after Jesus' death and his resurrection. And they all thought that Jesus should have been back by now. So he writes this to him. He says, but do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promises, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance, like Jesus said. God's heart is for everyone, but a day is like 1,000 years for God, and 1,000 years is like a day. Now, 1,000 years in this context, in that writing, is not a literal 1,000 years. It's like eternity. Eternity with God is like a day, and a day is like eternity. So what does that mean for us? That means that God has simultaneously lived every event in your life. The ones that have happened, the ones that are happening right now, and the ones that are going to happen. He has lived them simultaneously when we haven't even lived them yet. We tend to think, because it's the only way that we think in this linear way. But God is not a linear God. He works in and out and around time and space, however he wants to. So the big question is, what does God know? And you know what the answer is? I have no idea. Because God knows everything. So if you know everything and I have no concept of everything, then I can only conclude I have no idea what God knows. I just know God knows stuff that I don't know. And I know God has lived experiences with me that I have not lived yet because he is in and outside of time. And the things that are going to happen in my life, in your lives, in the lives of our children, in the lives of our church, in the lives of what we do, in the lives of these foster kids, whatever we do to live a footprint, we haven't lived those experiences yet, but God has. God's lived every single one of them. And somehow he allows us to have decisions. Esther made a decision, right? How big was Esther's decision in all of this? I mean, from a human sense, it shows a lot of faith, but that little banquet had very little bearing on the rest of the story, right? All the rest of the story is about what God is doing and the time, whatever events God has lived in that 24 hours, it was already done. Literally, by the time that she said, I'm going to have a banquet after 3 days of fasting, everything was already done. Every event. Every decision, every betrayal, everything has already been done. And yet somehow within that, people made decisions, some good ones, some bad ones. People got angry. People were frightened. People did all of these things. We're not just robots. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on, but God is responding somehow to every single one of those. That's some God. That's better than ChatGPT. Right? I remember when I was a little kid thinking to myself, how does God hear all my prayers? Every little question that I ask, every little thing I say, and somehow in today's world, we have technology that does exactly that. Billions of people every day asking ChatGPT questions and getting an answer in seconds. It's kind of like God, right? And yet not at all. Because ChatGPT, as amazing as that is, and how quickly it can do it, it can still only do it in a linear way. I want you to take just 2 seconds. Some of you it'll come to your head in 5 seconds. Some might need to reflect. What's that thing that's keeping you up at night? What's that thing you're probably not worried about going to see a king and wondering if you'll live or die. I don't know, maybe some of you are. We got some very important people here I'm not aware of, but most of us don't have that. But what's that thing keeping you up at night? I know exactly mine. What's that thing that's keeping you up at night? That you're worried about, you're stressed about, you're rightfully frightened about, causing anxiety. If you have all those things, well, welcome to the human race. We all have them. God has lived every experience you will ever live. It's already been done. It's already been done. And you need to hear this verse again. Do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years. Everything in your life can change from this little message till tomorrow morning. Everything can change. But the day of the Lord is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promises. What are the promises of God? If God is for us, who can be against us? Right? We're more than conquerors. How can you be more than a conqueror? You've either conquered or you haven't. Somehow we are. Co-heirs with Jesus. Everything Jesus gets, we get. I mean, those are big promises. He's not slow in keeping his promises, as some understand slowness. Instead, he's patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but to come to repentance. And this verse is salvific. It's about salvation, but still applies to every single aspect of our lives. In the next 24 hours, maybe you've got something really hard to live through. God has already lived it with you. I mean, that brings me a lot of comfort. I hope it does you too. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up, and we're going to sing a little bit, sing about eternity, sing about the goodness of God. But I want to pray for us. God, it's good for us to remind ourselves that we are just small people. We just live in this tiny little sliver of time and space, but you're not. You're extraordinary. You're eternal. You're outside of time and space. You've lived every one of our experiences, the ones we've had, the ones we're having, the ones we're going to have. Some of them are going to be difficult experiences, and some of them are going to be very good experiences. Some of the experiences that we are dreading are going to turn into great experiences like this one. We don't know, except we know the promises of God, the promises that you've made to us, that you love us. And as we just looked, you want good things in our life. You're not a cruel God. You're not an impatient God. You're not an angry God. You've been revealed to us through Jesus. And so we know you as you are. And there's a day that's coming that we're going to know you fully and completely. But we don't know all of that yet. So right now we live in this time-bound world where we fret, we worry, we get angry, we get frustrated, we get sad. We worry about our kids, we worry about our grandkids. We worry about our friends. We worry about our church. We worry about people that are doing things. And we worry about war and famine and so much going on in our world. But God, you've lived all of those experiences. And you love us. I'm grateful for the story of Esther, a young Jewish woman we know very little about. But she acted in courage. Even if she didn't act in faith, as far as we know, she acted in courage, and that's inspirational to me. Thank you for these reminders that in the end, you're God and we're not. And that's a good thing.